Morning and welcome everybody. Lovely to have you all here this morning, a large number of you as well, which is so lovely to see. Welcome to this morning's Supply Chain Sustainability School virtual conference, where we'll be diving into insights from a report that we've just recently published at Action Sustainability that looks at the experience of leading organisations on sustainable procurement. The report actually came about as it had been sort of a fair few years since at Action Sustainability we took a step back and considered some of the insights that we've gained working with loads of organisations on their sustainable procurement journey. So the report sort of delves into that, looks at our experience, looks at who we've been working with, and takes some really key insights and findings from that. For the analysis for this report, we've focused on a couple of key sectors where we've got really comprehensive hands-on experience. And we've got some members from those sectors here today with us as well. So those sectors include construction, train operating companies and utilities. So you'll hear from colleagues from those sectors in panels later on this morning, sharing their real life experience in this space. And they've also really valuably contributed to the report as well. Just to introduce everybody who's on the panel this morning, brief introduction on myself. So I'm a senior consultant at Action Sustainability, the company behind the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I might have met a few of you before. I focus on sustainable procurement and modern slavery workshops that the school hosts, so we do those services at Action Sustainability as well. That's a brief introduction from myself, and I'm also delighted to be joined by Laura from Great Western Railway. So Laura from GWR, she will introduce herself briefly just now. Hand over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, good morning, everybody. Really excited about talking on this session this morning. So yeah, Head of Procurement at Great Western. Thanks, Anna.
Laura. And Wendy from Suez.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm afraid my title's wrong on there. I'm not the director and chair, but I'm a Procurement, Sustainability and Compliance Manager at Suez. So yeah, really happy to be here today to talk about this.
Thank you, Wendy. And Ruchiee from Avanti.
Hi everybody, good morning. I'm Ruchiee, working as a procurement manager at Avanti West Coast. Really delighted to be here as it's one of the subjects I'm very passionate about, sustainability. So welcome all of you.
Thank you. We also have Dyanne, who worked for us at Action Sustainability, but has recently left and she's now in New Zealand. So it's late at night for Dyanne in New Zealand, but she played a major part in authoring this report. So lovely to welcome you here, Dyanne.
Thank you, Anna, and good morning, everyone. It is a lovely 9 p.m. for me, so luckily with the bright lights, you can't actually see it's night. But yeah, so I actually wrote the report and did the interviews together with Will in my then function as a sustainable procurement consultant. So I'll be talking a little bit more about the findings of the report later on, and of course we'll participate in the panels as well.
Thank you. And finally, Will, as Dyanne mentioned, a new member to our sustainable procurement team and who supported the development of the report. Hi, Will.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Will. I'm fairly new to Action Sustainability. I supported Dyanne on this report, and this is sort of my first experience with sustainable procurement. So it's a good learning experience. And yeah, I'll be talking a bit about the analysis we did in the report.
Thank you. So yeah, welcome. Lovely to virtually meet all of you on the other end of this conference. I'll quickly go through the agenda for this morning. So we'll take a look at the insights from the report. So across the sectors, we'll have a look at some of those insights. Then we'll go into a panel discussion focusing on the lessons learned and common challenges. We'll have a bit of a pause there for Q&A. Then we'll go into some sector deep dives and the insights that we've got from each sector. And then we'll have another panel focusing on the strengths and the gaps and how they can be bridged. Again, more Q&A. And then we'll end with a final question for the panelists on how can we ensure a continuous focus on improving sustainable procurement. Just to get us all warmed up and to get a bit of audience participation, because who doesn't love a bit of audience participation? We've got a couple of Menti questions. So nearly at 300 people on there, so we might as well get started in the concept of time. So first question, is your organisation aligned to ISO 20400? So some of you never heard of it, you're working towards it, you've had an evaluation or a gap analysis, or you're working on recommendations post-assessment. We've got a lot of you that have never heard it, of it, so you're in the right place. And we'll go into sort of what it is in a moment, which is good. So it means that at least some of you will definitely take away some learnings from this morning's session. Quite a number of you, again, working towards it. Next question. What is your role and what function do you sit in? And the reason we're asking this is because different organisations put different resources in place for sustainable procurement, and it's good to see sort of what those roles look like and what functions they sit in. So for instance, are you in procurement? Are you in sustainability? Are you in risk and compliance? So it's good to just get a snapshot of who we have on the webinar this morning. Wow, this is a lot. A lot of procurement and sustainability is obviously popular one, but I can see environmental managers, commercial. Yeah, so it just shows how diverse the roles are within this space. And so we'll also share some learnings on how people have implemented it within their organisation and where people best sit and how people are best supported to enable sustainable procurement to happen within their organisation. So 606 responses there, that's great. Next question. There's more of a quiz one. Okay. So what do you think the average maturity score is for an organisation that is assessed against ISO 2400? Basic, improving, established, mature, or leading? Yep, so the right question is established. So the maturity score is based on organisations evaluated by Action Sustainability against the ISO 2400 Sustainable Procurement Guidance Standard. We'll go into this in a bit more detail soon, but the majority of those assessed came out with an established score, and we'll go into more detail soon on what established means. But what it typically means is that organisations invest in sustainable procurement, have some level of sustainability embedded in their procurement activities. However, it's not yet at a stage where it's fully rolled out. So it's not yet perceived as business as usual or executed to realise all the benefits just yet. So it's that sort of middle scoring, and that's where the majority of organisations that we have assessed are sitting at the moment. But yeah, we'll go into a few learnings from that in a second. Okay, so that's the end of our little warm up there. Thank you for participating. We will hop back into Menti towards the end to get a few more questions from you all. Okay, so just as a starter, I'll hand over to Dyanne in a second, but just pointing towards this, we've got a QR code here for you to get access to the report through the Supply Chain School. So scan the QR code, head over, download the report, share it with your colleagues. It's on the Supply Chain School for free access. So yeah, head to it from here. And right now I'll head over to Dyanne to go through some cross-industry insights from the report.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anna. I mean, Anna's done a great job about explaining what this report entails already in terms of the overview. Also, for all those people that said they don't actually know what ISO 2400 Sustainable Procurement Guidance Standard is, there's actually a section in the report as well that provides a little bit more explanation of what it is, how it's being used as well. I will come back to that in some more detail too, but just know that there's some more information in the report as well. So when we started the report, we really wanted to achieve two things. First, it's to inspire organizations that have not yet started sustainable procurement. And it is sad, but there are still, of course, so many organizations that haven't. It's often a kind of an afterthought after the kind of corporate sustainability, which makes a lot of sense, but we are starting to look into those supply chains as well. So it's really trying to help organizations see how they can start their journey. But as a second, there's also a lot of organizations that actually have been doing a lot of great work on sustainable procurement and really driving sustainability further into their supply chains. And for those organizations, we wanted to have insights in the report to help them as well in terms of what can we do next? Where do we need to look to evolve our sustainability and sustainable procurement practices? So that's what this report set out to do. As I said, it is aligned to the ISO 2400 standard, and that is because we use that in Action Sustainability as the assessment methodology. We closely align to that. Actually, before I touch on this slide, I do want to say a big thank you to everyone involved. So the report isn't just an analysis of all the assessments that we've done and more information. It also highlights best practice and really good practice from different sectors, some of which there are today. So I just want to say a really massive thank you to all those individuals and organizations that have so kindly shared their case studies with us that are in that report as well, and in different formats, just to make it a little bit more fun. Some you can listen to, some you can read, some you can watch as well. So big thank you to everyone involved. So onto the assessment methodology. As I said, we as Action Sustainability, we align closely to the ISO 2400 standard when we do these assessments. The way we assess organizations is fairly straightforward. We look at all the documentation that there is, and we also talk to stakeholders. So whether it's through workshops or interviews, we really try to get a good picture of, okay, what is it that they have in place in terms of resources, but also what are the lived experiences? So what does it look like in practice? How do we do that? It's with the ISO 2400 standards. The ISO 2400 standard is kind of broken down into 4 levels. The first of which is fundamentals. So you start, or you don't necessarily have to start, but on the top level here you can see is the fundamentals. The fundamentals are about, do we really understand what sustainability means within an organization? Do we understand every aspect of it, if you will? So sometimes, or more so previously, I think that's changing nowadays, but we used to think about carbon and that was it. But there's a lot more, right? Carbon, waste, modern slavery. There's a lot. There's the triple bottom line that people might know. So do really understand the core subjects of sustainability and sustainable procurement, and really the impact that that has on the supply chains. The next level down talks about policy and strategy. And this is where we want to understand if sustainability is really incorporated into any of those documentations. Do we have 5-year plans towards what sustainable procurement should look like? Do we have the strategies in place? Is it all outlined? Are there policies? So is the procurement policy, for example, does that include sustainability? Not only that, but also in terms of accountability. So is there a clear outline of who is responsible for what when we think about sustainable procurement? When we go a level down, that's where we really start to get into the nitty-gritty, and this is the enablers. The enablers is a really large chunk of sustainable procurement, and it entails a lot of different things that you will see a bit more later on as well. But enablers are all the things, all the activities, all the resources that the actual procuring individual needs to use or can use to drive sustainability in their supply chains. So think of people enablement. So this is skills development, example, but also tools, templates, stakeholder engagement, anything you can think of that will help drive and implement sustainability in the procurement process fits within that enablers bucket. The last one is really the activity itself. So the procuring individual, have they implemented sustainability into the procurement process? When we think about that from a very high level, plan, source, manage, is sustainability really incorporated at every stage of that, and to what extent? So what you see on your screen, please don't get overwhelmed. There's a lot of text. I'm sure we'll share these slides with you. It's also in the report. But of course, when we do an assessment, there's a maturity model that underlines all of it. So what does this maturity model look like? Of those 4 levels, so fundamentals, policy, strategy, enablers, and procurement process, we also look at the maturity stages. Those maturity stages range from what Anna already discussed, and it was in the quiz, range from basic all the way to leading, and also have a numeric value to them. So when we think about basic, this really means that there is no understanding and no commitment towards implementing or incorporating sustainability for any of these levels. When we think about improving, so score between 1 and 2 that an organization will get, this means that there is an awareness that sustainability is important, and that there are some plans in place that sustainability will be incorporated into the procurement processes or the policies, but it's not there yet. So it's kind of in the future. Established, and I explained it perfectly already, so I won't talk about it too much, but established essentially means stuff has been happening. Organizations are looking into it, have been doing some implementation, but have not necessarily rolled out yet. And you'll see that for all of these stages, there's a lot of kind of barriers and resistance to implementing sustainability, whether it's from the own function or other stakeholders. This is really where that change management comes into play. Next then is mature. Mature is where an organization's sustainable procurement, or for any of these levels, is at a stage where it is a little bit more normalized. Sustainable procurement and activities that are involved with it are more part of a habit. There's less resistance to it, and generally people understand the need for it. Leading, the last one, where you score between 4 and 5, is then really where sustainable procurement is just normal. It's not an extra thing. Procurement, in essence, is sustainable. That's, of course, where we all would love to work towards, but it's very difficult to achieve still to this date. But here, what you'll see and what really separates organizations from mature to leading is that continuous focus on improvement. So there's a lot more kind of structure behind improving. There's more resources and enablers like tools and data analysis, and that focusing on improvement is for the function, but for the supply chain as well. And it's also about looking ahead at what else is coming. Sustainable procurement as a field is relatively new in the grand scheme of things, so it's also very much evolving. So it's really about looking ahead at what else is coming next, where we actually go into some of the results in the report. So hopefully I've given you a little bit of a breakdown of how this all works in the background. But as we already discussed in the report, the overarching score was a 2.6. So that's kind of right in the middle of established. And as we've said, there's still some resistance. A lot of organizations still find that they have some resistance to work with. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But we can also see that there is a lot more investment happening, a lot more senior levels, for example, asking about sustainable procurement and what procurement functions can do to deliver on this. So we do see that back in the scores. What you see on the screen, beyond that 2.6 score, is also a breakdown. So within each of those levels, so the fundamentals, policy and strategy, there are subcategories that make up the score for those, and they're also color coded. So you see that color code come back throughout today. But you can see that actually all of these are in the established level, but some are a bit more ahead than the others. So what this tells us is that there is definitely that increased awareness for sustainability and sustainable procurement. We're definitely looking in towards supply chain sustainability, how we can achieve it, but we're still working on it. And I think this one will help a little bit more in terms of visibility. So when we break it down and we kind of map it out onto that maturity model, you can see that this image is a little bit altered. So because everything is established, we've broken down the established one to see where the high and the low established scores. And what you can see here quite clearly is for the fundamentals and the policy and strategy, these are all about, setting out, outlining what we want to do, putting it in kind of documentation, but it's not necessarily the delivery of it. So there isn't necessarily as much of an impact that we can see yet. And that's because of some of the skills and capability gaps in the enablers and the procurement process. So you can see, for example, enabling people being a lower score, setting priorities is a big one we'll touch upon today, but you can see that coming back into the procurement process, for example, as well. I do want to highlight that measuring and improving performance is the lowest score, and you'll see that across the board virtually with every organization, and that's because, fairly straightforward, it requires a lot of data, and we all know how difficult it can be to get data, and the whole digitization. Of course, when we think about procurement and sustainable supply chains, we need to understand what we want to track and we need to figure out how to do it, especially within the supply chain. So this is something that is going to be low for very many organizations because it simply is relatively difficult to achieve. And it's something that will become easier when everything else is in place. So that's usually normal for that to be lagging compared to the rest. The only other thing I want to highlight on this is for the procurement process. Obviously, when we think about us procuring and procuring functions, historically, it was all about sourcing. We get asked, we need this, okay, we go out and we find it. So that's the sourcing part that scores higher is also not very strange, it's expected, but it is interesting to see that is quite a big gap compared to plan and manage. And that's because where it comes to sustainability and a lot of organizations that we've worked with, it usually depends on the expertise and the determination, the will of individual procuring professionals to embed sustainability rather than it's an actual standardized process where it really is the whole life cycle. So you'll see that sourcing is stronger, but now what we need to do is turning that into a holistic approach, making sure that we go from plan, source, manage, that sustainability is embedded in all of it. And this is the last slide for me, and then I stop talking, I promise. Then we go into the panels. And I won't talk too much about this slide because we will discussing these challenges in the panel as well. But looking at the assessment, but also in our work just on a day-to-day basis, whether it is these ISO assessments that we do or just working on sustainable procurement in general, there's a few challenges that virtually everyone faces. And it might just be helpful to know that you're not alone. And you're definitely not the first one to have faced these. The first one is always where to start. Sustainable procurement is a mammoth of a task. It's not easy. It is overwhelming in the beginning, as I'm sure the panelists can talk about as well. But really, the advice is just to start somewhere. It doesn't really matter where you start, as long as you start. The indecisiveness of not starting will cost you more in the end than starting somewhere and then have incremental steps up. The next one is always a classic one that we always hear. And this is also when I'm talking about that change, sustainability is too expensive. Procurement should focus on the cost. How can we be saving costs when we want sustainability? Always comes at a premium. That is not necessarily the case, but there's also long-term benefits and really thinking about the added benefit, not just for sustainability. As an example, we're all trying for procurement to be much more strategic. We're managing our supply chain risks. For supply chain risks to be managed, we need visibility into the supply chain. That visibility is also what you need to drive sustainability. So it will always come back and help you in a different way as well. Next one is a little bit more for the advanced organizations that have kind of picked the low-hanging fruit sometimes and start to look at SMEs and try to drive sustainability in those areas and say, that's difficult, that's really tough. Yes, driving sustainable supply chains with SMEs can be tough, but actually we're making it a lot more tough for ourselves than it really is. Thinking about SMEs, there's some areas where they actually do things differently and better than large organizations, such as relationships with their suppliers. They'll be much more personal and have much closer relationships. So there's a part in the report where Dr. Anastal, so I'm not going to steal his thunder, but he does research into this topic from the Auckland University of Technology, and he has a whole research based on SMEs and supply chain sustainability. So definitely have a look at that too. The last one, not too much detail, but it's team capabilities. Sustainability and strategic procurement requires talent. It requires people to think differently, act differently, and understand a lot about sustainability that they might have never learned about. So it's really about how can we make sure that we get the right people, but also upskill everyone in the business as well. And with that, these are some highlights of the report, but of course there's a lot more detail in there. So I invite you to just look at the report as well.
Thank you very much, Dyanne. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A function that maybe as we just head into the panel session, you can answer a couple of those, have a flick through about sort of numbers assessed and things like that. So if you can answer a couple of those, that would be great. But thank you for that. That was great. Now I would like to welcome our panelists off mute. We've got a couple of questions where we're going to dive into some of those lessons learned from the common challenges that Dyanne's just sort of browsed over a little bit there. So yeah, welcome panelists, welcome back. To start off with is quite a broad sweeping question. So you're all quite well on your way in your sustainable procurement journey, but what for you was some of those key challenges in starting that journey, and how did you overcome them? In terms of who goes first, I'll direct it to Wendy first.
I think for me, it's changing the traditional perspective of what procurement is. You know, traditionally it's very been focused on cost and quality and service and time, but you're incorporating a whole new element here in sustainability, and you're changing perspectives that have been there for a long time. So that can be really challenging. And I also think, going back to one of Dyanne's points about this perspective that, or the perception that sustainability always costs more. We've had some really good projects where actually being sustainable has saved us, like on our LED lighting, for example, where we moved to LED lighting at about 70 sites, and we saved about 9,000 tonnes of carbon and £300,000. So it just gives you an example of where it doesn't always have to be more expensive.
Yeah, no, that's great. Ruchiee, if you can answer that one as well.
Absolutely. I think when we started our journey on sustainability, I believe one of the biggest challenges we had was stakeholder engagement and the awareness. So it's, what do you really mean by sustainability? I think it's the interpretation of the word sustainability. It could be pretty comprehensive, and if you really want to make it short, it could just be doing the right thing, be a responsible business. But it does cover varied areas of sustainability. So I think as one of the biggest challenges we had was making our stakeholders, internal stakeholders primarily, being aware of what is sustainability, what do we expect out of them, what our expectation is from them in the short term, long term, what engagement are we looking for. I think, well, it's been a journey in its own, but I think we're pretty much at a good stage at the minute when we have stakeholders coming up to procurement saying, oh, is it the right thing to do? Are we doing it in a responsible way? Are we procuring in a responsible way? So yes, we have had that journey, but the awareness to start with was one of the key challenges we had at Avanti.
Oh, that's great, thanks. And Laura, over to yourself.
Yeah, I think for me, just building on this issue that the topic is just so big, really, and that feels quite, untangible. It's very hard to kind of get your head around and know where to start. You mentioned, Dyanne, about, just start somewhere, but how do you find what that is? And I guess for me, the way that I did that was I had started and I think a lot of people are in this place as well, to take a real personal interest in this topic, not just at work. And, there are all sorts of, there are books, there is stuff on social media, there is conversations over the dinner table, there is stuff in school, so making it more personal and bringing it to life in that way really helped me. I could connect to that, and then I could link it with things that were going on at work, with topics, with contracts and suppliers. So that helped me kind of get over that initial hurdle. And it is, I think, the hardest one when you first, like you say, Ruchiee, you kind of sustainable procurement, what does that mean? It's huge, actually. It is huge. And I went to a few events as well, sort of the start of the journey, if you like, for me, and sort of getting embedded in this. And that helped as well, listening, like today, listening to other people talk about it in a more day-to-day way, rather than acronyms and big words and that kind of stuff. So, that was definitely a help for me.
No, that's great. You've a lot of you've touched on sort of what my next question was going to be. So I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. It was going to be how you got stakeholders on board. But it seems, that personal touch, really engaging, is, part and parcel of how you got stakeholders on board. But maybe flipping it the other way around is, how did you get the buy-in from the top? How did you have those conversations? Is there any tips that you can share on getting that buy-in from the top to progress with sustainable procurement? And first off, I don't know, any volunteers to take that question first off?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Anna. So I was going to sort of, again, link to what I was just saying, you know, really, if you need to find the people in your organization that are interested in the first place, whether it's senior stakeholders or anybody that you're trying to work with. If you're, you know, metaphorically kind of banging your head against a brick wall, you're not going to get anywhere. So whatever those steering groups or exec meetings that have got the right people in the room who are listening anyway, because it's part of their role or it sits in their team or they've just got a personal interest in it, try and tap into that as much as possible. We've got a great initiative at Great Western called Winning on Waste. That's a group of people from across the organisation, across departments. You know, again, fantastic resource, fantastic group, you know, to engage with. So it's definitely kind of identifying the people that have got that interest for me.
Yeah, that's great. Ruchiee, Wendy, anything to add on that one?
Absolutely. I completely agree with Laura here. It is the buying from the exec that really does help. One of the key things we have at Avanti, which I think's been pretty powerful, is we have a sustainable team. So it's a sustainable team who's launched the responsible plan. It's a 10-year plan, started in 2021 up till 2031. It's phased out. We've got very clear objectives. So we've got pillars to look at. We've got planet, people, communities, customers. So we know what exactly are we looking at, and that's probably where the buying in from the exec came in. If you've got right people in the teams who are driving a central objective, then it's easier for the execs to concentrate on the right thing. And I think the mission statement we have at Avanti is pretty sustainable as well. So clearly shows that once it starts at the right level, it can be cascaded down. So the mission statement we have is make a difference today to look after tomorrow. I think it's pretty impactful and a very sustainable statement. So we're all driving towards it.
Great, thank you. Wendy, anything from yourself?
Yeah, I think we're very fortunate to have a CEO that's very passionate about this, which really does help if you've got it at the top. And we've also got a chief sustainability officer and a sustainable team, like Ruchiee mentioned. And I think that really helps, because then you get the buy-in. If you get the buy-in at the top, if you say I wanted to implement this, then it can be done a lot quicker. We also have a team of sustainable champions, one at every site. And then you're engaging them as well. Like Laura said, people that are already passionate about it, it makes it so much easier than trying to pull people along who aren't engaged. So yeah.
No, thank you for that. No, that's great. And then on the flip side, I suppose talking about your suppliers. So in the report, it focuses quite a lot, Ruchiee, on how Avanti took suppliers with you on that sustainability journey. Can you tell us a bit more about that experience in bringing suppliers along on the journey?
Absolutely. I must start saying it's not been easy. It's been a bit of a journey. I think the starting point here was the partnership and the collaboration. So that's pretty much how we thought we could embed sustainability. Now, as I mentioned before, it's a journey. So it has a starting point, and pretty much we're not at the end at the minute, we're still in that journey. So when we have clearly articulated objectives in terms of what sustainability means to us at Avanti, it could be varied things from diversity to environment to the social bits. And we've got various things on HR coming up these days. So having the right set of objectives being achieved by your respective suppliers is pretty key. So identification of what we expect to achieve from our suppliers is key here. We did take a couple of suppliers on board. We've introduced SRMs. We've introduced a bit of contract management that actually helps us evaluate the performance of our suppliers. And also it's more like a partnership. We also learn in this journey. So we can't say we know it all as an organization. So it's a mutual, the relationship works. We learn various great things in terms of how suppliers manages the sustainable supply chain, and that gets embedded into us for our procurement process. We clearly would have the right KPIs. We'll do the tendering process. We'll ask all the right questions. But if we do not work with the supplier to actually identify how they put that all theoretical bits into practice, then we're leaving a gap. So that's pretty much how we've taken the suppliers from the onboarding, followed by the tendering process, into the contract management, followed by SRM, to actually understand the journey. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Laura, any tips from yourself on bringing suppliers along on the journey?
Yeah, I think my experience has been that actually a lot of the time the suppliers are further ahead than we are. It's quite, it's a differentiator for them actually when they're submitting bids and having these conversations. So very often, like you said, Ruchiee, we're learning from them, and I'm a massive fan of collaboration and sharing and working things through genuinely as a partnership, not any kind of dictating going on. I'm also keen that we don't duplicate requests for data. So on the sustainability sort of path, we're trying to use tools like Achilles Link Up, where we're inviting suppliers to be part of that, but then the data that they input is shared with multiple buyers, not just us. Things like that I think are really helpful, particularly SMEs, but any organization really. And then finally, the sustainability expectations that we have and the commitments and the aims, we're trying to embed that into our sort of specifications generally, not as a specific section, because it can become a bit of a tick box issue, and we're really keen to avoid that. So we're trying to encourage responses from suppliers and conversations and contracts with suppliers where that is just embedded into what they do. It's not some kind of add-on or extra nice to have. So yeah, that's our kind of approach at the moment.
Great, thanks, Laura. And Wendy, how about yourself?
Yeah, I agree with what's already been said. A couple of other things. We've also started doing supply newsletters. So we're sending it out to all our suppliers to let them know what our expectations are, and also give them support, links to webinars they can attend, things like that. And we also have done for the last 2 years, we've run supplier awards, where we do supplier awards on like environmental categories, social value categories, and that really rewards the suppliers that are innovative. And I would say, going back to Dyanne's point about SMEs, over half the winners so far have been small suppliers and social enterprises, who are fantastic in this area and can be really innovative.
Yeah, no, agree with that one. Thank you. Final question, building on that final challenge that Dyanne mentioned in her closing part of the presentation there, is do you have any tips on building the capability of those in procurement and sustainable procurement? So Wendy, we'll start with you on that one.
I think the school itself is actually a fantastic resource, where people can do their self-assessment on sustainability and get learning pathways. That's been fantastic. And as a partner of the school, we've also had some dedicated workshops for the procurement team, which has been great as well. I would also say make it part of objectives and performance reviews. So we have, they have an objective on sustainability, and so this can be a motivating factor. And regular meetings to share best practice, because it is daunting for people if they haven't done sustainability. They don't know where to start. So do a bit of hand holding and small steps. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Wendy. Laura?
Yeah, this is supply chain school. It is absolutely fantastic. That's been really helpful for us, getting people access to very easy, some of it's quite short and easy to absorb and can be done in between other things, and there's some bigger stuff obviously on there as well. And the heat map, so part of the ISO 2400 assessment talks a lot about using a heat map, which I'll be honest, I struggled with it a little bit to start with, but actually going back and revisiting it as a tool, it does help identify, it kind of lifts you up, I suppose, and kind of helps you see from a higher level those hotspots to say, well, actually, as a category, as a particular area of spend, that is something that we really need to focus on, because there's all sorts of sustainability issues on that. Over there, that particular category, it's really not going to be very relevant, so we don't need to worry about it. That has helped us kind of focus and identify who in the team needs their capability potentially to be moved on, or need to be more aware, or whatever it might be. So again, we're early stages with that, but it has been helpful in focusing on where we need to look at.
Yeah, no, great, thanks. Ruchiee, anything from you?
Yeah, it's all of what's been said, to be honest. And also an effective implementation of procurement supply chain sustainable policy, I think, would be pretty good to just share as a tip. It's always good to have a starting point somewhere. So if you've got your base correct and you know what exactly you're sharing with the right audience, would be pretty good as a starting point. You'll always identify gaps in this journey and the process, but your starting point is key here. And then followed by adequate trainings you can deliver from time to time. One thing I'll just like to highlight is don't think sustainability is just something too onerous. It's something you can embed in your day-to-day life. It's not something you need to sit down and start thinking about, oh, I need to do sustainable procurement. It's not that. It's something that should flow into your procurement process smoothly without any efforts. So that's pretty much what I'll say people to think and drive sustainability in procurement should be how it should work. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. So yeah, that's all the questions we've got from that panel section. So we'll now get into the Q&A, and we've had a nice number of questions come through, which is always good. So the first question I'm going to ask is from Tim. So what would you actually measure to demonstrate that your procurement has become more sustainable? I'm trying to think who's best to answer that one in terms of sort of performance measurement. Laura, you've put your hand up.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. So for us, the framework that we've put in at Great Western is we have a sustainable procurement strategy with 3 really clear aims. Off the back of that, we've also got the commitments, the actual commitments themselves. And our aim is to measure how many of those commitments actually end up in a contract, and then how many are actually delivered. So the commitments are the classic kind of topics that you would see around environment or, social value. And I've guided the team to say, I don't ever want to see all 8 in a tender or a contract. That's silly. You're probably going to have a couple, 1, 2, 3 at the absolute most, that are going to be relevant to it. And we're measuring then how many are in our tenders and ultimately our contracts and how many are delivered.
Great, thank you. And following on from that is sort of that question of data. So from an anonymous attendee, we have, in terms of data, what are you able to collect from suppliers that can really support internal reporting and calculations, because granularity is difficult to obtain? Does anyone have any thoughts on that one?
Probably a starting point is just to gather things like how much spend you have with SMEs. That can be one that you can do yourself. You don't need to gather, you need to know whether they're SMEs, but that can be a good starting point. So we report on that. We also report on how much we spend with social enterprises, and then also for specific contracts, how much we spend with local suppliers. So that can be data that you hopefully you can get from your own systems as well as a starting point.
Ruchiee, anything to add on that one?
Yes, I could just add, we're also looking at science-based targets to start with. It is difficult to, because the spectrum's quite broad in terms of what do you measure, how do you measure, what's relevant. The science-based targets, I think, are pretty key to us. We started focusing on. That could be very specific to how much carbon's reduced, how many suppliers, the number of suppliers who form a part of SME. SME itself is quite big. Just by saying it's a SME, if you drill down, you will see that itself, it's a big topic. So I think that's pretty helpful at Avanti.
Thank you. No, that's great. We have a question here as well on EU legislation and directives that are coming through. So Dyanne, I'll pass that one over to you, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. It's probably easier to say it than to type it out anyways. So really, when we think about the EU legislation, there's so much coming out almost at once that will have an impact on UK businesses, absolutely. Especially when you think about, for example, the German supply chain feasibility or the Due Diligence Act that's already in force, and they've already organization been fined if you have so much as an office space, right, with employees in Germany, you'll fall under that. So if you are a UK organization that actually has offices in Europe, you'll fall under a lot of these. And the thing with procurement is it's the supply chains. So whether you like it or not, the supply chains are most often not going to be just in the UK. So there will be a lot that you need to look into in terms of where that will be impacted, but definitely EU legislation will have an impact on how you do business, but it's also a really good urgency driver to just, if it's still a challenge to get some buy-in internally for sustainable procurement, you see that legislation is really picking up pace, also in the UK as well. And what you see in terms of what we've seen with kind of climate and carbon, it started off a little bit soft. There weren't really a lot of consequences, and we're really building up towards more kind of consequence style legislation where there will be fines and you do have to report, and it's not just saying one thing or saying we do something and you don't have to show anything for it. It's really getting into the more detailed level of legislation, and the same we see on a more humanistic side. So supply chain due diligence, modern slavery acts, and you see that these kind of start evolving into legislation that really requires you to take action as well and remedy whatever you find.
No, that's great. Thank you very much for that one. And the final question from this Q&A pause that we've got here from Jeremy. So I'll ask this to all three of you panelists based on reflecting from your organisation. So what are the current drivers to adopt this guidance standards from either a regulatory or a client demand perspective? So we'll start with you, Laura, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, in the rail sector, there's a very obvious issue, I would say, with net zero and carbon, doing what we're doing, running trains. So we have a pretty strong regulatory driver in our sector. But I think probably more on a more personal level, I just honestly believe that, you can't ignore the science that is out there, full stop, that drives lots of us as individuals, and that filters then into organizations, whether it's client, buyer, supplier side, it doesn't matter. I think it's just something that's a topic that everyone is kind of really starting to get their head around. So I think that's the driver. I think a few of the Q&A kind of calls out that this is it's an assessment, it's not a accreditation, but it is, for us, it has been unbelievably helpful to really crystallize how we make our supply chain sustainable. Where do we start? What's the plan? How do we improve it? So I don't need another driver. That's it, really. I want to do the right thing, and it's helping me do it.
Great, thanks, Laura. Ruchiee, I'll pass over to you, considering the same sector sort of thing.
Absolutely. It is exactly the same as Laura mentioned. We are heavily regulated, so we do have committed obligations we report on. We need to do a quarterly reporting, a yearly reporting, and we have very clearly articulated measurements on how we're doing. So clearly that is the driver. But along with that, I think we've got the right people in the business to drive the passion of sustainability embedding into the supply chain. So I think that's driving it pretty well at Avanti as well. We've got a fantastic sustainability team who've got very clearly outlined agenda items to be done in phases. So everything cannot be achieved at once. So that helps drive a journey, and that pretty much connects with the drivers we have on the committed obligations.
Great, thank you. And finally, Wendy, how does that look like at Suez?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the internal drivers, like the others have said, the personal passion of senior management and people throughout the business, which is a big driver. You do have a lot of public sector customers, and so you have things like the Social Value Act there, which is really important to them. So we're getting more and more questions in bids. So that is another driver as well. Legislation does work sometimes. So that is a help. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll finish that slot there for panels and Q&A, and I'll hand over to my colleague Will now, who is going to lead us into a bit of the sector deep dives, the maturity for each of the sectors that we're looking at, some of the strengths and the gaps that we've got as well there. So I'll hand over to you, Will.
Yeah, so I was just going to do a sort of brief overview of some of the analysis we did. Obviously, there'll be the full analysis available in the report if you want a bit more detail and maybe some questions answered there. So what we have here is going back to the maturity scale. The three industries we looked at were construction, utilities and train operating companies. So we can see with construction that there was quite a lot of organisations from the groups we had that fell into the mature section. The average score for the sector was a 3 out of 5. So this was the highest of the 3. So it kind of suggests that the industry itself is a strong stage for driving sustainability in their supply chains. And then there's the utility sector, which out of the 3 was the lowest. It had a score of 2.4. So they're sort of at the lower end of the established stage, which kind of suggests that there's quite a few organisations there that are just starting on their sustainable procurement journey and implementing the ISO standard. And then finally, we've got the train operating companies, which was just below the constructions with 2.9. So it was quite a mature stage. But what we found is there was a bit more of a split between this industry, with some at the lower end of the mature stage and some at the higher end of the established stage. So you can kind of see there's like a bit more of a spread between the two established and mature areas of that industry. So yeah, as Dyanne mentioned earlier, that it's sort of the standard split into these 4 main categories that then have levels below them and sections within them, which is the fundamentals, policy and strategy, enablement and process. And we can see that all 3 sectors did score quite highly in the fundamentals, and this was showing that they understand what drives sustainability initiatives, and they do engage in a good level of due diligence. Although we can see that where the utilities, it does drop down in the other 3, so this hasn't quite translated across for them. But then with the TOCs and the construction, they also had quite a high policy and strategy score, which kind of suggests the policies and strategies in place within that industry are quite strong and do help them enable a more effective implementation of sustainable procurement. And then with the enablement and process, you can kind of see that there is a bit of a drop for all 3 sectors. We can kind of see, that was the trend here with these 2 areas, which Dyanne did mention that it is a lot more of a deep dive into sustainable procurement with these 2. And this is something that we can kind of see that maybe all 3 sectors are struggling at just a little bit more to effectively enable their procurement teams and stakeholders to really drive sustainability in their supply chains. And then if we go into more of like an individual sector analysis, we can see that with the construction industry anyway, it maintained quite a stable score across. So as we go into the fundamentals and down each level to the more detailed analysis areas, we can see that they did maintain quite a stable score across all 4 areas. You can see the 2 most developed for them were due diligence and commitment and alignment. And we could kind of put this down towards the prevalence of the golden thread methodology, which is very common in the construction industry. And this is kind of an approach taken that looks for organizations to use their goals, their visions, their values to inform their processes and their systems and their people. So they sort of, it all interconnects, and that is something that the ISO standard is also very good for. So you can it kind of does link. We kind of assumed with due diligence and commitment alignment being the 2 highest, due diligence is obviously quite important in the construction industry. There is a lot of projects that require this, will require suppliers. So that kind of makes sense there. And then also when we looked at individually companies within the construction sector that we had analysed for this, and we found that all of them had made some sort of formal commitment from the top management to sustainable procurement. So it kind of shows that they're committed, they're aligned here. So that's why those 2 are probably the 2 highest ones for them. In terms of the gaps in the sector, we kind of focused on enabling people, which is another section of the standard. And within this section, there is a category called personal objective rewards and recognition. And that's where we found the construction industry had or caused this lower score in the enabling people category. And this is around communicating expectations on sustainability to your stakeholders or all stakeholders in the business. And we kind of came up with a solution that to include sustainability goals and objectives within employee and staff incentive plans, reward schemes, or staff development evaluations. So yeah, that's the construction industry, sort of an overview. And then we've got the TOCs. So from the data for the TOCs, it kind of, again, going back to this, how there was some in the established, some in the maturity, much broader spread in terms of this injury. We kind of almost split the industry into two sections. We had advancing TOCs and starting TOCs. So we labelled the advancing ones as those who are further along their sustainable procurement journey and they'd had strong foundations already in place. And then the starting TOCs are the ones who sort of just began their journey and just getting going. So maybe that's why their scores are a bit lower. And we can see for the whole industry, again, it's that fundamentals, the drivers, the due diligence is where they really stood out. And the one area for this that we focused on in terms of a gap is the setting priorities. And we sort of put this down to, if you've got your starting TOCs who have just began their journey, they haven't quite identified all their priorities, all their sustainability concerns within the supply chain yet. So they're still looking to do that. And then with the advancing TOCs, they might have identified their sustainability concerns, but they're now at the point where they're looking to tailor these concerns to the different spend areas so they can reflect the issues that they've identified in each area of their supply chain. And like a sort of solution to that would be using a method like heat mapping to work out where each issue might be relevant in that supply chain. And then if I move on to the final sector, yeah, so with the utilities, once again, we've got that strong foundational fundamentals in place. Again, it's similar to the construction industry with the utilities, that importance for due diligence with suppliers for being so important for projects. It kind of shows that is really important to them as well as the drivers. So they're obviously two strong points for the sector. But again, averaging the sector out to be one of the lower of the three, we've also identified enabling people as a gap here for them. But this time, instead of that personal objective rewards like it was in the construction industry, we found three other sort of lower areas within the enabling people category, which were staff competence, performance management, and tools and guidelines. So it kind of shows that maybe there's a bit of a gap in the industry of understanding how we can, or how they can deliver sustainable procurement. And this kind of would sum up why the sector maybe is a little bit further behind than the other two for this analysis anyway. And to look to improve on this would be investing in staff competence and providing more tools, guidelines, like through the sustainability school, to help enable this procurement. And I think that would be a really key area for that industry to focus on from our analysis. And yeah, that's all I've got. As I said, if you want to find out a bit more about that analysis, definitely check out the report, because we go into a lot more detail on these kind of topics.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Will. That was really good. And again, like you said, check it all out in the report. There's some really good details in there and sort of call outs for the key positives and the gaps that are in there. So now we're into our next panel section, where we're going to discuss what makes the strength strong and how the gaps can be bridged. For this one, I'm going to hand over to Dyanne, and I'm going to put on my previous experience of working in the construction industry hat. So any questions about construction will probably come my way. But yeah, I'll hand over to you, Dyanne, to lead this panel section.
No problem. And Anna, you're also perfectly qualified, not just previous experience, but obviously you work a lot with construction sector anyways, through what you do now as well. So as Anna already said, it's all about the gaps and the positives that we'll just run through. let's focus on the positive first, and then dive a little bit deeper into what some of those gaps are, and how you've overcome them yourselves, or how you're in the process of doing so. So I wanted to look at the positives, and when we look at the positives within these sectors, there's quite a common thread between all the sectors. So this will be kind of for everyone. When we think about due diligence, for example, so really the fundamentals are quite high: due diligence, understanding the drivers and the commitment. When we think about that from the sector perspective, or even if you think that there's something about it that you're doing just in general to have that very clear within your organization, what makes it such a high score for yourself? So Ruchiee, would you like to go first, and then I'll kind of follow the people on my screen?
Absolutely. I think for us, the key is communication and engagement. We can all start with the right things to do, have the fundamentals, have clear strategy, have processes in place, have policies. But until and unless that is effectively communicated to the right audience, you would always see a gap. So one of the biggest drivers clearly is communicating the right thing. And then you need to buy in the engagement from the right stakeholders. Now, if I am contacting a stakeholder who probably doesn't care about what sustainable procurement would mean to him or her, then we're not going to get anywhere. So it is identifying the right people in your organization to drive sustainability throughout. One thing I would like to mention is we should be thinking about, minimizing the total lifetime cost of procurement. It could be any ongoing maintenance, the cost, safety, sustainability, adverse effects on environment, the various things that we can include as drivers. So that needs to be very, very clearly set at the start and then communicated effectively.
Brilliant. And then I'm assuming those drivers, you look at what others internally also value then, right? When you're talking about the cost as well. Brilliant. Laura, do you have anything to add to that?
I think we've mentioned it a couple of times this morning already, that there is a very typical kind of answer almost, in that, to make a plan, you can copy things from other people. That's perfect. You can put that onto paper. Actually delivering something and delivering it consistently over and over is definitely the harder bit. So I think doing that early work, the due diligence and the planning, is in any subject, I think, a little bit easier. We certainly sort of, I think, found some success by simplifying that as much as we could. So, there is a real, it's quite easy, I think, on this subject to kind of have a huge list of things and a massive table, and right, we're going to change the world and we're going to fix it all. And you have to kind of, draw back from that and say, no, that's just not going to happen. Otherwise, we won't get off the starting blocks. So simplifying things all the time, that has been something that's helped us achieve, I think, on this area as well. So for us, kind of three really key early aims about saying what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and being transparent about that has been helpful.
Brilliant. So really keeping on track then. So Wendy, I'll go to you next. And I'm going to just skip you for this one, because I'm sure you can talk for days on how that can go well in construction, but I'll use you on the questions on how to bridge some gaps. Wendy.
Yeah, I completely agree with what the others have said. I think almost the fundamentals are the easy bit, because there's less people involved in writing the policy and the strategy and putting all this in place. And then you almost need everyone involved in when you're actually doing things. And that's where it can become more difficult. I agree with what Laura said about keeping it simple, and it can be daunting looking at all the sustainability topics and thinking you've got to tackle your entire supplier base. So just start small, start with your key suppliers. If you're doing good things with 10 suppliers, that's a start. You don't have to tackle everything at the same time.
Brilliant. And another one that comes back, and we see this very, very often, is around setting priorities. So not only in that sustainable procurement implementation piece we were talking about already, but priorities in terms of me as a buyer, which sustainability impacts should I focus on? Because we're all starting to do a really great job at actually recognizing that isn't just carbon or it's just one. So often there's 8 different types of sustainability impacts we look at as an organization, if not more. Some have it a little bit more simplified, which is also nice to see, but even that, right? If there's 8 or 12 or 6 for a buyer to think, I need to do everything already in terms of procurement, and then I need to add sustainability in all of these on top of that, it really isn't the case, right? Because some sustainability impacts matter so much more in certain spend areas than they do in others. Some have a really big impact on community, for example, whereas others don't even really touch any communities. So how do you prioritize and help buyers or anyone that's procuring? How do you help them prioritize the right types of sustainability that are relevant and important to them? Does anyone want to jump in?
Yeah,
Wendy, go ahead.
I'll go. I think something that Laura mentioned before, but the heat mapping exercise is perfect for this. So, you know, with the buyers, you work with them to heat map a category and you can find out where the highest risks are. So for our fleet category, it's going to be things like carbon, alternative fuels, you know, which will be completely irrelevant for some other categories. So that's the real big starting point, is to work out what the risks are. And I would say for your own business as well, you know, you kind of need to heat map your business and work out where your biggest areas of concern are. And secondly, look at what your customers are asking for, you know, see what questions you're getting in bids around sustainability and social value, and that can add into your priorities as well.
Absolutely. So you're really linking it all together, which is what we like to see, just really making sure that it's all aligned with each other and everyone is aligned with each other as well. Does anyone want to add to that?
I was just going to jump in and just say that from a very practical perspective, we've talked about heat maps quite a lot today, and people might not know what that is or what it kind of looks like. So, you know, in a very basic format for us, we've done it on a spreadsheet. You know, we've had categories, so types of spend down the left hand side, you know, so it might be IT, could be marketing, could be FM, and then across the top, those sustainable types of topics. Again, that can be unique to your organization, but there's loads of stuff out there you can copy, you know, have those topics across the top, and then do a very basic kind of high, medium, low scoring methodology. So you get like this RAG status, or this kind of traffic light view across your map of categories across your supply chain that tells you where the hotspots are. And that's the idea of the heat map. So for those that are listening and watching, you know, that might just be helpful just to visualize what we're talking about when we talk about a heat map.
Yeah, that's a good addition. Ruchiee, did you want to add anything else?
Yep, just apart from the heat mapping exercise, which is already mentioned, one thing that's assisted us is also having a consistent KPI model that could get embedded into the contract, which actually helps the buyers to not reinvent the wheel. They don't need to start thinking about, I need to get KPI X added, then KPI Y added. If you give them a baseline and you give them a base, they can actually review. So this is where procurement expertise comes into play. And you could review and customize what's appropriate to the contract and add it. So starting from the heat mapping to assess the risk, but then that can easily flow down to having a contract in place that could be evaluated and measured. So it makes everyone's life a lot easier.
One last thing as well, I was just going to say that in terms of priority setting, just a really simple thing that I've done is kind of give my team permission to only include 1 or 2 things. So rather than, again, everyone sort of, you know, you feel like you've got to include all 8 or 10 or 12 or whatever every time, you know, I don't want that. I don't think it's relevant. It doesn't help the suppliers. It doesn't help anybody. So kind of giving that guidance / permission to say, no, pick 1, pick 2, no more than that, has also, I think, helped people focus in quickly, take that and go and do something with it.
Yeah, it's that quality over quantity. I think that's really key. That's great. Anna, do you want to join in from a construction perspective? Obviously, it's a lot more project oriented. How do you think about heat maps, and how does that work within construction?
Heat mapping is great, and it's definitely the starting point. But I think if you really want to, especially on a construction project basis, if you really want to achieve something tangible, to set those priorities, there's probably 2 things to think about. One of them is the leverage that you have with the suppliers. So obviously asking something quite far out there in terms of sustainability to a supplier where you don't have much leverage, you're not really going to achieve an awful lot. So considering the leverage that you have is a key thing. And also actually knowing your suppliers. So having the conversations, knowing what challenges they're facing, you know, are they investing in certain areas? Are they looking to innovate? That collaboration piece is really key as well in helping to sort of achieve and set priorities. So yeah, leverage and knowing who your suppliers are really well is a crucial one within construction, because it's on that project base. You can sort of spend a bit more time having the conversations, and it's also, you know, the contract potentially could be for a lot of years. You're going to be working very closely with them anyway. So finding out what sustainability areas to focus on with those key suppliers is an important and easy way to achieve it on a construction project.
Brilliant, thank you for that. I want to shift it down a little bit more towards the procurement process. We've obviously seen from the data and in conversations that it's still a gap, mainly really thinking about the whole life cycle from plan to source to manage. How do we really make sure we can embed sustainability in that? I want to ask everyone, what is it, or can you highlight a few activities that you've done to really make sure it's embedded from plan to source to manage, and that anyone that's in a procuring capability, any type of function, understands how they can do that? Ruchiee, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. I think it's a consistent approach we have followed within Avanti is in this entire procurement process of analyzing the requirements until delivering and then follow it with the contract management SRM. There is still a way to go on the latter. We're still working through, but I think it's really important to understand what sustainability means at the start. So when we're analyzing requirements just at the start of the procurement process, it is absolutely important to start thinking about what sustainability means for a particular type of a procurement. It could be varied. Now, all of the sustainability principles aren't valid for all sorts of procurements. This is probably where we help within the procurement team to help key stakeholders to analyze the importance given during this entire procurement process. I think clear communication to the suppliers within the tendering process also helps. They understand the value we add, or we would like the suppliers to add within this domain, which is really important to us. So yes, I think a clear vision on setting right at the start of what we expect from the supplier for a procurement process is really critical. But we've got some standardized templates we are using, which to buyers' expertise are customized for every procurement.
Brilliant. Laura, anything to add?
I mean, it's definitely, you've said it, you know, it's definitely the area that we've struggled with the most. We really want to do this stuff, but it's really hard. You know, procurement is often up against a massive time pressure, and, you know, we've got to get something out the door and it's got to go, and the contract's expiring and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, it can be hard to make sure that this conversation happens as a golden thread throughout everything that we're doing. Like Ruchiee was just saying, you know, for us, we are focusing in on our sort of stepping away from the procurement, the tendering process, which is on that, it's a bit, you know, it's a bit like a train, excuse the pun. It's a bit hard to stop, you know, when it's on the go. If we kind of step out and go a bit higher level and look at, you know, talk about heat maps, category strategies, you know, at a higher level, what is our sustainable goal for this category? That feels like a better we've got time in those conversations to talk about it a bit more deeply. You know, SRM, supplier relationship management, and contract management, it's a really difficult topic. Every organization I've ever worked in procurement, this is a difficult thing to tap into and get right, but we absolutely need to. It's the way forward. So I think that kind of what I refer to as the kind of the bookend of the tender process, that early stuff and the end stuff, is where the conversation probably needs to happen to make this right, to really embed it and get it into the stakeholders' way of thinking. So we're not there yet, but that's where our kind of our strategy is heading, probably.
Brilliant. And Wendy, is there anything you'd like to add from your perspective?
I largely agree with what the others have said. I think we do the same with the category plans. We have sustainable actions in there, and then we have regular review meetings with the teams throughout the year to make sure that we're on focus, because they can get so busy that it just almost gets lost. So you need to keep checking what's going on and keep offering support and advice as well, to make sure we're on target. Again, having minimum evaluation criteria and tenders and standard tender questionnaires with additional questions depending on the category, that's really useful as well, so people know that it's people, and the suppliers know that it's really important. And then the SRM afterwards to check that what is actually being said we'll do in the tender is actually being followed through. So you just need to keep the golden thread throughout.
Brilliant. And what I'm hearing is a lot of it needs to be fast, right? Procurement kind of always gets involved too late. We wish we were involved a lot earlier than we usually are. What has been really key, and if anyone wants to jump in, Ruchiee, you've talked about kind of having templates and having things ready to do things quickly, but is there anything else that you can share with the audience that might have helped you kind of change the narrative a little bit, or maybe that procurement gets invited earlier, or you give people a bit more room to focus on sustainability? Is there anything anyone wants to share on how they've achieved some successes in this space?
Just to answer that question, I'll just go first. This is one of the key areas we are focusing on at the minute, which is the engagement with the stakeholders ongoing. At the minute, we are too busy in managing projects because we've got loads of it, and there's always a shortage of time, and there's plenty that comes which is unknown. So I think planning being the key, what we are regularly and constantly sharing with our stakeholders is plan ahead. So the more we plan, the better we can get at the execution. And that is something which it's a constant message that we are delivering. We're not yet there. We're still messaging everyone saying, tell us, we get involved early so we can set the right stepping stone. But the more we engage with just the internal stakeholders, right stakeholders, even the sustainable teams to embed right sustainability criteria is really helpful. I know we would struggle with it, but again, we're all on a journey.
Absolutely. Anyone wants to add on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is a constant struggle. And it doesn't matter how many times you say it, people go, what do you mean you can't turn it around in 2 minutes flat? I mean, we're benefiting slightly, selfishly, I think, in procurement from a economic situation that is driving people to be more careful with their budgets. There is no spare money around. People have to plan better than they did before, and they can't just dip into buckets of money that kind of appear on the 31st of March each financial year. So that is great. I also think in procurement sometimes we need to avoid the own goals. So the planning that happens in procurement, I think needs to get a bit stronger. So looking way out. I'm yet to convince a few people I think that this is the right thing to do, but 3-year, 5-year pipeline views of renewals and projects needs to get better. There's also, on the flip side of that, there is an acknowledgement that there will be genuine last minute things that need to happen. So what can procurement do to support the business in those issues? So things like frameworks and PSLs that probably went through a phase of having a bad press, I think, is my kind of view on it. I think they have their place, and if they're used in the right categories, then they can work really well. So again, we need to look at how we can put some of those in place to support the business. But and finally, as well, on all of these things that we've talked about as well, not just on this question, but when you find someone that does something really, really well, if you find an area of the business that engages really early, tell the world, do the case studies, put it out there, do a good PR job on it, and show everyone how amazing that is and what the benefits were. And then people kind of go, oh, I want to, I'd like a bit of that. And it's the same with sustainability, where we have got the contracts where, the stakeholders have been really engaged, the market has been really engaged, we've had a fantastic outcome. Those are the ones that we need to shout about and put out there front and center. So yeah, that's my view.
Brilliant. Absolutely. So, and I just coming back to the whole question on kind of procurement process and embedding sustainability into this from a construction perspective. Obviously, it kind of goes a little because of the project nature. What do you feel as can be done better in the construction industry, or what are some of those barriers that you think can be overcome?
Quite similar to what everybody else has already said, actually. It's normally that sort of transition period from you've done your planning, you've done your sourcing, then in the management phase, that's often where it gets dropped off. So and it's often, especially in construction projects, it's passed over to another team who haven't been involved in anything that's gone on prior. So they're not aware of the conversations they've had with the supplier, potential challenges in achieving sustainability targets, what mechanisms are going to be in place, what specifications there are in place. So that handover piece is really, really important. And whether that's bringing, the contract management team through the journey as it's ongoing, or having a really effective handover meeting, that's one way, obviously, where you can overcome that challenge, and making sure what's agreed at the start of the procurement process is actually delivered. Another thing is making sure that when you're agreeing requirements, and this is sort of linking a little bit to a question I can see from Noel in the Q&A function as well, is making sure that, whether it's from the client to the supplier, there's mutually contractual requirements in there. So it's not just all pushed down on the supplier, it's meaning that you as an organisation are upholding some commitment to sustainability as well, whether that's supporting the supplier in collecting data, or building their knowledge, or giving them time to put things in place, or whether it's something about how often you review things, or how they submit their data, or how you have conversations on things, making sure that it's not just completely pushed down on the supplier, and that you as an organisation are taking some sort of responsibility for it as well. So whether that's how you're purchasing things, we were on about the time frame to turn things around, giving suppliers actual time to be able to respond to requirements. Yeah, so making sure it's a two-way process, not just we want to push this down onto our supply chain. It's the only way things are ever really going to achieve. Otherwise, you're going to squish and squish and squish further down the chain, and things are never really going to be realised or achieved in terms of sustainability. Yeah, so I'd say those are some of the key things to think about with the procurement process.
Absolutely. Brilliant. So I want to use the last few minutes to kind of provide a little bit of depth for your sections in the report as well, just by asking you individually about some of those changes that you've made. So Wendy, obviously you have a part in the report, and you talk about having that dedicated sustainable procurement role, and I believe it's for kind of 9 months now, I think start of the year somewhere. Have you seen any really good kind of changes, positive changes from that others might be able to use as a bit of a business case for themselves?
I think it's been invaluable, to be honest. I've been doing sustainable procurement for years, but as an add-on to managing categories and things like that. And your time just gets chipped away. Just being able to dedicate myself to this means that we've gone a lot further in the last 9 months. I've been able to implement things like supplier newsletters. I've been able to push forward with supplier awards and get engaged with a lot more external companies, such as doing things like this to share best practice and where you can learn from other people. So it's having the time to do it. My expertise is built, and then I can share that with the team, and it raises the profile of sustainable procurement within the organisation, because people realise that it's important. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a dedicated role on it. So yeah, it's been invaluable.
Brilliant. Laura, of course, you've done the ISO evaluation twice, and we've talked in the interview a little bit about the changes and, of course, the improved score. What are some of those changes, or how have you approached it between those two evaluations that has really made a change to the scores, and obviously positively? So what are some of the key changes you've made based on that evaluation?
Yeah, thank goodness it went up and not down. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I love this question. It's quite hard to articulate, but I think probably the change was, ironically, was making it simpler. It's not fair to say that the first time around it was a bit scattergun, but I think we were still in that mode of trying to do everything, trying to tick all the boxes. And actually we had moved on with our thinking and our approach. And actually this happens, when I think about it, this happens quite often, on a new topic, it's like, metaphorically, I talk about emptying all the drawers of the cupboard. You take everything out, pile it up in the middle, sort it out, and then you go, I don't need 70% of this. This can all go in the bin. And you're left with the good stuff. And you go, right, that matters. For Great Western, this is the stuff that matters. This is the stuff that's going to make an impact. I know this is going to resonate with people. This is the right language. And that is where we've got to. We've kind of done all that sorting out, consolidated it. I've mentioned the 3 sort of aims of our strategy at the moment. We're still in early days. So we're identifying our framework, setting it out, being transparent with it, publishing it, and then moving into these commitments and embedding those into the tenders and contracts. So I think that was the change for us. Getting a few other stakeholders on board as well. But we're it feels like everything's moving at a nice, controlled kind of pace now, probably. And I feel like it's a lot clearer. I know what the next few steps are. I know what I need to achieve and how I'm going to achieve it. And obviously, when you do that, you're able to answer those questions a bit more succinctly and with the right sort of evidence. So I think that was probably the shift, really.
And I can imagine people feel much more at ease now and more comfortable and confident in what they're doing then as well.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And Ruchiee, obviously, we've talked a little bit already about how you bring suppliers on board and others on board and communication, but we also talked in the interview about third-party solutions. And I really at the earliest beginning of this morning, I talked about, the data being tough and getting information from suppliers. Do you want to explain a little bit more about what you're doing at the moment?
Yes, absolutely. Just on the supply front, I believe having the right point of contact to give you information at a supplier level is quite critical. So not always the account manager who's managing the supplier contract would be the right person to speak to. So identifying the right person to engage with at a supplier level is quite key. I think a lot to do with this whole collaboration helps here, which is the supply engagement post-contract. I think we, as procurement professionals, are very actively involved into the purchase. So you look at the cost, you look at the savings, you look at the right things to do and put everything fantastic into the contract. But I think we miss a point by saying this is all out there, but are we actually in real world managing that contract? Are we bringing all of the efficiencies we have talked about within the contract into the real practice? And that's probably where the supplier engagement relationship really helps. We've had various contracts, I wouldn't say key contracts, but critical contracts with high level spend with the suppliers. The good thing is we've had a great participation from them as well on the sustainable front of things. It's not always about environment and social, but it can also be about innovative methods, cost, which we as procurement quite love to see. What are the benefits, efficiencies? So we've been doing a lot of that recently. And yes, we do have some great examples within the organization, but we've got few good case studies to lead. And this is where we're communicating to a lot of buyers to help do a similar practice, share similar things with their contracts. So that's helping.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think this has been really useful, and we still have about 50 more minutes of this webinar, so I would like to go to Q&A because I know the questions are stacking up. So it's good that we will answer a few. I think also questions that don't get answered, don't worry, we can answer them offline and send them to anyone. So if there is any question that you do want to ask, do still post in the chat, but we'll obviously go from most upvotes down. So Anna, would you like to do the Q&A again?
Yeah, all good. So the top upvoted one, which has been there for quite some time now, so we will get round to answer this right now, from Tim. It's on social value. So can you provide some insights or experience of how social value fits into sustainable procurement, such as delivering social value as a consequence of procurement? And I know a few of you have already mentioned how social value fits into what it is that you do as part of your sustainable procurement impact. So I don't know if anyone has any insights or experience of that they want to share.
Yeah, a lot of ours, so we have contracts with councils, and a lot of them, they want to know what we're going to be spending in the local area with local suppliers from a procurement perspective. And then also there's additional things like whether we can host supplier days, supplier events, things like this can add to your social value, especially with the smaller suppliers, using social enterprises and charities and things like that. So those all come into social value as well.
Thanks, Wendy. Laura?
Yeah, I mean, there's a massive crossover. The work that we've done on social value and then sustainability, it's all in the same department, really. I think I worked in the social housing sector before coming into rail. The social housing sector developed a very specific definition for what social value meant for them, and I've taken that with me into transport because it is, I think, unique to the sector. So that's probably quite helpful to understand what social value really means for you. What I pick up in rail is that it sort of leans more towards the local sort of, local supply chain. How local is it? Are they VCSEs? Are they SMEs? It's that kind of language that gets talked about more. So that's the kind of data that we're looking at, but also around fair wages and fair payment seems to crop up a lot as well. So, and that is very much a part of the sustainable procurement piece as well. So, really they are very intertwined for the work that we do, not much difference. And that's where we kind of focus our questions, really. And the two kind of then come together.
Great, thank you. Anyone have any heartwarming examples to share from an example of social value delivered through sustainable procurement from their experience?
I don't have an example saying we bring values and it's measured, but one thing I've recently seen is the apprenticeships. So they're pretty talked about across industry these days, but we've added a few clauses into the contracts. I wouldn't say it's mandated, but very customized to a few areas and categories where we clearly are driving a bit of social value on that front. And we can measure it. It's very simple, how many apprenticeships you have on board, how many are serving on the account. It's not a massive work to get the measurement sorted, but that's really worked effectively. And even as simple as having a D&I policy. So does a supplier have a D&I policy? Usually, I think 90% cases I've heard they say yes. And now SMEs are quite driven to have their own D&I policies as well. So these are small, quick wins we can have without getting too much into the whole vision of social value, which is quite broad.
Great, thank you. So for the next question, I'm going to combine two of the questions that have come through from Ashley and Natalie. It's about incentives and contract mechanisms. How do you have any experience of using those to achieve and improve sustainability with suppliers? Any takers for that one?
Yeah, we've got lots of examples. I think I'm just trying to think of some specific ones. I mean, a good specific one is about percentage to landfill. Obvious, but in terms of a measurement for sustainability, that's really good. Water, water, electricity usage, that's another. Yeah, it needs to be unique to that particular contract. So we had an example in Great Western where we use a supplier to wash, workwear and rags that get used. So, the amount of chemicals and the amount of water that was used was really, really important and specific. So we focused in on that as a measurable, measure. So that's one example. Yeah, definitely.
I could just add in saying we got catering within Avanti as well. It's one of the key examples for sustainability, driving sustainability. Catering, as it might sound, it's like food. So it could be from the food wastage to the packaging and the wrapping of the food. So it is sustainability from the start till the end we've looked into. And this is very effectively measured from every week to a quarterly reporting, going to the annual reports.
Thanks. And anything on incentives? So sort of that carrot instead of a stick approach with the suppliers, any experience of incentives used?
I think our supplier awards have been good for that. Advertising the fact that you can get an award if you do something well. That's really helped because suppliers and when they get one, they want to get one the next year. I'm like, you can't get it for doing the same thing, so you're gonna have to come up with something new. So that's a good incentive. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, and just a quick one before you go to the question, I would like to add as well, we did an exercise a few months back where we kind of asked the suppliers and on the buying side what everyone wants or what they think suppliers want. And I think often we think, oh, suppliers just want more money, they want bonuses, they want monetary incentives, but it actually really depends, and it often depends on the size of a supplier. So for the smaller organizations, it's not always money that is the biggest incentive, it's getting their name out there, getting case studies out there. And that's when you're alluding to it with your awards, that's a great example of one of those options where they can shout about all the good stuff that they've done. So really, I urge everyone to think a little bit more creatively about the incentives and think about what would be helpful. Some organizations have kind of a set of different incentives and they just apply the right ones. Obviously, you can't exclude suppliers from awards, but they just apply the ones that are relevant and that are a positive for that supplier.
Yeah, great, thank you. Next question is about that evaluation process. So how do you make sure you are procuring the most suitable and sustainable solutions when there is so much innovation across the market? Any tips on that one?
I think it's about having a good questionnaire to start off when you're doing your tenders. Specify what you want, have a good questionnaire, have it specific to the tender. And this is a key one for me as well, in making sure you evaluate it fairly. So I work with the procurement team to ensure that we're comparing apples with apples, so that everyone's evaluated fairly and making it as a higher percentage of the tender as you can.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Wendy. Anybody else, anything on that one?
I think, again, the category strategy stuff. So using that to do some of that market insight and analysis as well to understand what is happening from an innovative point of view so that you can steer your sort of questions, so that you're pitching it right, because some sectors are more innovative than others, so you need to pitch it at the right point. That's another approach that we're taking.
We did have a final question for the panelists. So the question is, what do you do to ensure continuous focus on improving sustainable procurement? And I'll hand that over to Wendy first, if that's okay.
I think just keep talking about it. Just keep on about it to everyone. So to senior management, to everyone in the business, keep telling them what you're doing, keep telling them what your plan is, and get that engagement. Because if you go quiet on it, you can just get bypassed if you're not careful. So I think it's been said before, but communication is probably the top priority.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. Laura?
Yeah, so I would recommend embedding this in people's personal objectives. People can't escape that. And then again, back to communication, team meetings, talk about it all the time. It's a standard agenda item. What are we doing in this space? What does our strategy say that we're going to do? What's next? So those are the two key things for me.
And Ruchiee, from yourself?
It's just about phasing out the steps very clearly within our team meetings. So I've started doing that already, is bringing a subject as sustainability to every team meeting we talk about. So it's not gone anywhere. As it says, it's a constant monitoring needed. So it's a continuous process and improvement. That's what we're doing at the minute. Keep talking about it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Hopefully those last closing tips were useful. To close, we have a few more mentee questions that we want to just close with. I'll flick to the question. So what would you like to know more on to continue your sustainable procurement journey? And again, this will help us to tailor what we provide through the school. So straight away measuring performance, that's very good to know. Strategy as well, supplier engagement and development. So there seems to be 3 clear winners there, which is useful. Obviously, we can focus in on that. Give it a little bit longer, a few more votes to come in, but it seems like the trends are the same. So strategy, measuring performance, and supplier engagement and development. And next question is, where do you need support? So thinking of those enabling pieces, so not just the topics, but the enabling pieces. Where do you need support? Upskilling people, upskilling the supply chain, bringing the sustainability strategy to life, procurement process tender questions, or contract clauses. Pretty level pegging across the board, but upskilling people, upskilling the supply chain, bringing the strategy to life in procurement seems to be the main three, which is good. Again, just another point towards, again, and as well, we'll be sharing the link with you all following this. Head to the supply chain school, get the report, have a read of the report. It's there for you for free. Also, a little quick plug for an event that we've got going on next week. For those of you also interested, we're hosting another webinar next week to launch another great document that we've produced. So this one is a procurement guidance document addressing modern slavery and labour exploitation in solar supply chains. So again, use the QR code to register for that, or head to the Action Sustainability website and you can register online for that there as well. And finally, if you have any questions, reach out to us, that's absolutely fine. And a final one from me is thank you very much to all our panelists. Been really great, them sharing their insights, their contribution to the report. It's been, great to chat with you all. So very much appreciate you taking the time this morning. And on that note, we have 1 minute left. I can't believe we've actually finished on time. And hope everyone has a lovely rest of their Thursday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.